The morning sun cast long shadows across the polished marble floors of Buckingham Palace as King Charles III sat alone in his private study, staring at the leather-bound document that would change everything. The golden seal of the monarchy gleamed in the early light, but the weight of what lay before him felt heavier than any crown he had ever worn. Sarah Chen, his most trusted legal advisor, had presented the papers just 24 hours earlier. The document represented months of careful research, constitutional analysis, and quiet consultations with Parliament's most senior members. Now, as Charles ran his fingers along the edge of the ancient oak desk that had served British monarchs for over 2 centuries, he knew that his signature would rewrite history. The origins of this moment stretched back 18 months, to a conversation that had begun as a simple family dinner. Princess Anne, his sister, had raised concerns about the rigid traditions that governed royal succession. She had watched her own children, Peter and Zara Phillips, live relatively normal lives outside the direct line of succession, while other European monarchies had successfully modernized their rules. "The world has changed, Charles," Anne had said that evening, her voice carrying the weight of decades spent serving the crown. "Perhaps it's time our traditions caught up with the times." Those words had planted a seed that grew slowly but steadily in the king's mind. He began asking questions that previous monarchs might have considered unthinkable. Why should ancient laws determine who could serve the realm? Why should birth order matter more than capability, dedication, or the genuine desire to serve? The turning point came during a particularly challenging period for the monarchy. Prince William had been recovering from a serious riding accident that left him bedridden for 3 months. During his absence, other family members had stepped forward to fulfill royal duties, and Charles had watched with growing admiration as several of his relatives demonstrated remarkable skill and dedication. Princess Beatrice had handled a complex diplomatic crisis with grace and intelligence that impressed even the most skeptical government officials. Her younger sister, Eugenie, had spearheaded a mental health initiative that garnered international acclaim. Even more surprising was the emergence of Lady Louise Windsor, who at 20 had shown a maturity and public speaking ability that reminded Charles of his own mother in her younger years. But, perhaps most remarkable was the performance of Zara Tyndall, Anne's daughter, who had coordinated disaster relief efforts following severe flooding in northern England. Her hands-on approach and genuine connection with affected communities had generated more positive media coverage for the monarchy than any formal state event in recent memory. These observations led Charles to commission a confidential study on royal succession laws across European monarchies. The results were eye-opening. Sweden had amended its constitution in 1980 to ensure absolute primogeniture, meaning the firstborn child, regardless of gender, inherited the throne. The Netherlands, Belgium, and Norway had all implemented similar reforms. Even more intriguing were the informal mechanisms these countries had developed to evaluate and prepare potential successors based on merit rather than mere birth order. The research team, led by constitutional scholar Professor Margaret Hartwell, had worked in complete secrecy for 8 months. They examined historical precedents, analyzed public opinion data, and consulted with legal experts from across the Commonwealth. Their conclusion was both surprising and compelling. The British people, particularly younger generations, were far more open to succession reform than most political leaders realized. The palace's internal polling revealed remarkable statistics. 68% of respondents believed the monarchy should modernize its succession laws. More striking still, 73% agreed that royal duty should be assigned based on ability and commitment rather than birth order alone. Even among traditionalists, there was growing recognition that the monarchy needed to evolve to remain relevant. Charles had always been a modernizer, but he understood the delicate balance required when dealing with constitutional matters. Any change to succession laws required careful coordination with the government, approval from Parliament, and consent from the governments of the Commonwealth realms where he served as head of state. The process would be complex, potentially controversial, and certainly unprecedented. The preliminary discussions began quietly in the autumn. Prime Minister Sarah Mitchell, known for her pragmatic approach to governance, proved surprisingly receptive to the idea. Her own political instincts suggested that a modernized monarchy could help strengthen public support for the institution during challenging economic times. "The monarchy has always been a stabilizing force in British society," she told Charles during one of their weekly audiences. "If these reforms help ensure that stability continues, then I believe they deserve serious consideration." The legal framework for the proposed changes was revolutionary yet carefully crafted to respect existing constitutional principles. Rather than completely abandoning hereditary succession, the new system would establish a meritocratic process within the royal family. Potential successors would be evaluated based on their performance in royal duties, their public service record, their ability to connect with people, and their demonstrated commitment to the values the monarchy represented. The document before Charles outlined a new institution, the Royal Assessment Council. This body would consist of senior government officials, Commonwealth representatives, religious leaders, and distinguished citizens from various walks of life. Every 5 years, they would evaluate the performance of family members who had expressed interest in eventual succession. Their assessments would inform the monarch's decision about the succession order, though the final choice would remain with the crown. The proposal included safeguards to prevent political interference and ensure continuity. The heir apparent would still need to meet traditional requirements regarding marriage, religion, and constitutional role. However, the expanded pool of potential successors would include grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the sovereign, regardless of their parents' position in the original line of succession. Perhaps most significantly, the reforms would establish formal royal service periods where family members could demonstrate their suitability for future leadership. These periods would involve significant responsibilities in areas such as diplomatic relations, charitable work, military service, or cultural preservation. Performance during these periods would weigh heavily in succession considerations. The implications were staggering. Under the new system, someone like Princess Anne's daughter Zara, who had shown exceptional leadership during the flood crisis, could potentially be considered for succession based on her proven abilities. Lady Louise Windsor's impressive academic achievements and growing confidence in public speaking could position her as a future leader. Even more distant relatives who demonstrated exceptional service to the realm might find themselves in consideration. Charles understood the risks. Conservative members of Parliament would certainly object. Some Commonwealth realms might resist changes to their constitutional arrangements. Traditional monarchists would argue that he was undermining centuries of established practice. The media would inevitably sensationalize every aspect of the debate. But he also recognized the potential benefits. A merit-based succession system could reinvigorate public interest in the monarchy. It would demonstrate that the institution was willing to evolve with changing social values. Most importantly, it could help ensure that future monarchs were genuinely prepared for their roles and supported by the people they would serve. The morning's newspapers lay scattered across his desk, filled with the usual mixture of political commentary and royal speculation. None of the journalists had any idea that within hours, their understanding of the monarchy would be fundamentally challenged. Charles picked up his fountain pen, the same one his mother had used to sign important documents throughout her reign. He thought about Elizabeth II, who had modernized the monarchy in countless ways during her 70-year reign. She had opened royal homes to the public, embraced television coverage of royal ceremonies, and gradually made the institution more accessible and transparent. She had also expressed private concerns about ensuring the monarchy's relevance for future generations. The crown must serve the people, she had told him shortly before her death. If we cannot justify our existence through service, then we do not deserve to exist at all. Those words echoed in Charles's mind as he considered the magnitude of the decision before him. This was not merely about changing succession laws, it was about fundamentally redefining what the monarchy meant in the 21st century. His private secretary, James Whitmore, knocked softly and entered the study. "Your Majesty, the Prime Minister has arrived for your meeting. She's waiting in the blue drawing room." Charles nodded, carefully placing the document in his desk drawer. The meeting with Prime Minister Mitchell would be crucial. Her support would be essential for moving forward with the reforms, and her political instincts would help navigate the complex parliamentary process that lay ahead. As he walked through the palace corridors, Charles reflected on the conversations he had held with family members over the past months. William had been surprisingly supportive, recognizing that the reforms could actually strengthen the institution he would one day inherit. "If we're going to ask people to support the monarchy," William had said, "we should be able to demonstrate that we deserve their support." Catherine had raised practical questions about how the new system would affect their children's lives. The proposed reforms would give George, Charlotte, and Louis more choices about their futures while still preserving the possibility of service to the crown. Rather than being trapped by birth order, they could pursue their own paths while remaining available to serve if called upon. Harry's reaction had been more complex. Despite his physical distance from royal duties, he had expressed cautious support for reforms that might prevent future generations from feeling as constrained as he had. His own struggles with royal expectations had highlighted the need for more flexibility in how family members served the institution. The most surprising conversation had been with Princess Anne. Known for her traditional approach to royal duties, she had actually been one of the strongest advocates for change. "I've watched my own children thrive outside the direct line of succession," she told Charles. "But I've also seen how arbitrary our current system can be. Merit should matter more than birth order." Even more unexpected was the enthusiasm from some of the younger family members. Lady Louise Windsor had quietly expressed interest in taking on more royal duties, while Princess Beatrice and Eugenie had both indicated their willingness to serve in expanded roles if the opportunity arose. The conversation with Princess Anne's children had been particularly enlightening. Peter Phillips, despite his lack of royal title, had built a successful business career and maintained strong family relationships. Zara Tyndall's Olympic achievements and her natural connection with the public had made her one of the monarchy's most popular figures, even without formal royal status. "The current system wastes talent," Zara had observed during a family gathering. "There are people in this family who could serve the country brilliantly, but they're never given the chance because of where they fall in the succession line." These conversations had convinced Charles that the time for change had arrived. The monarchy needed to adapt or risk becoming increasingly irrelevant to modern British society. The proposed reforms offered a path forward that honored tradition while embracing progress. As he approached the blue drawing room, Charles could see Prime Minister Mitchell through the partially open door. She was studying documents of her own, probably briefing materials prepared by her staff. The next hour would determine whether his vision for monarchical reform had any chance of becoming reality. The ornate clock in the corridor chimed 9 o'clock. Palace staff moved quietly through the hallways, beginning another day of serving an institution that had endured for over 1,000 years. Soon, if Charles had his way, that institution would begin its most significant evolution since the English Reformation. He paused at the door, taking a deep breath before entering what might be the most important meeting of his reign. The future of the monarchy hung in the balance, and the decisions made in the coming hours would echo through history for generations to come. Prime Minister Sarah Mitchell stood as King Charles entered the blue drawing room, her expression carefully neutral despite the magnitude of what they were about to discuss. The morning light streaming through the tall windows illuminated the room's historic paintings, silent witnesses to countless pivotal moments in British history. "Prime Minister," Charles greeted her warmly, gesturing toward the comfortable seating area near the fireplace. "Thank you for making time for this discussion." Mitchell settled into the burgundy leather chair, her briefcase positioned within easy reach. At 52, she had earned a reputation as one of Britain's most pragmatic leaders, someone who could navigate complex political waters while maintaining public trust. Her rise from a working-class background in Yorkshire to Downing Street had given her an intuitive understanding of what ordinary people expected from their institutions. "Your Majesty, I must admit that when your private secretary contacted my office about this meeting, I was intrigued by the level of secrecy involved," she said, her Yorkshire accent still detectable despite decades in London politics. Charles smiled slightly. "What we're about to discuss will require the utmost discretion, at least until we determine whether it's politically feasible." He paused, studying the Prime Minister's face. "I want to propose fundamental changes to how the monarchy operates, changes that would require parliamentary approval and, potentially, constitutional amendments." Mitchell leaned forward, her political instincts immediately engaged. She had learned to read people during her years in Parliament, and she could see the genuine conviction in the King's eyes. This was not a casual conversation or a theoretical discussion. Charles was proposing something significant. "I'm listening, Your Majesty." Over the next hour, Charles outlined the proposed succession reforms in detail. He explained the research that had led to this moment, the family conversations that had shaped his thinking, and the vision he had for a modernized monarchy that could better serve the nation in the 21st century. Mitchell asked pointed questions throughout the presentation. Her legal background helped her grasp the constitutional complexities, while her political experience made her acutely aware of the potential challenges they would face in Parliament and among the public. "The Conservative Party will be split on this," she observed. "Traditional monarchists will see it as undermining centuries of established practice. But some of our younger MPs have been pushing for institutional modernization across the board." Charles nodded. "I understand the political risks. But I also believe we have an opportunity to strengthen the monarchy for future generations. The current system is increasingly difficult to defend in a society that values merit and equality of opportunity." The Prime Minister studied the preliminary legal documents that Charles had shared with her. The work was impressive, clearly the product of months of careful research and consultation. More importantly, the proposals seemed designed to strengthen rather than weaken the monarchical institution. Your Majesty, I need to ask a direct question, Mitchell said, her voice taking on the tone she used during difficult parliamentary debates. What happens if we move forward with these reforms and they prove unpopular? The monarchy has survived for over 1,000 years partly because it has avoided dramatic changes that might provoke Republican sentiment. Charles had anticipated this concern. Prime Minister, I would argue that the greater risk lies in failing to adapt. Recent polling suggests that public support for the monarchy, while still strong, is declining among younger generations. They see the institution as outdated and irrelevant to their lives. These reforms could help reverse the trend. The king pulled out additional documents, including the comprehensive polling data that had informed his decision-making process. The numbers told a compelling story. While overall support for the monarchy remained solid at around 60%, support among people under 35 had dropped to just 42%. More troubling were the responses to questions about the monarchy's future relevance. Only 31% of young adults believed the institution would still be important in 20 years. Among university-educated professionals, the numbers were even lower. These statistics should concern anyone who cares about the monarchy's long-term survival, Charles observed. We need to demonstrate that the institution can evolve and remain relevant to changing social values. Mitchell reviewed the polling data carefully. Her own party's internal research had identified similar trends, though they had not focused specifically on the monarchy. Young voters consistently expressed preferences for institutions that demonstrated merit-based advancement and meaningful public service. What about the Commonwealth realms, she asked. Any changes to succession laws would require their consent, and some of those governments might resist reforms that seem too radical. Charles had already considered this challenge. We've conducted preliminary discussions with the Governor-General's offices in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. The response has been more positive than I expected. All three governments have indicated willingness to consider reforms that modernize the monarchy while preserving its essential constitutional role. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, covering practical details about implementation, potential timelines, and communication strategies. Mitchell's questions became increasingly focused on the mechanics of moving forward rather than whether they should proceed at all. If we decide to move forward, she said finally, we would need to manage this very carefully. The last thing we want is a constitutional crisis or a public relations disaster. Charles agreed completely. I propose that we begin with quiet consultations among senior parliamentarians from all parties. If there's sufficient support for the general concept, we can then develop detailed legislation. The Prime Minister gathered her documents, her mind already working through the political implications. Your Majesty, I need to discuss this with my senior advisors and probably with the leaders of the other parties as well. This isn't the kind of decision that should be made hastily. After Mitchell left, Charles returned to his study to find James Whitmore waiting with the day's correspondence. His private secretary had served the royal household for over 20 years and had developed an uncanny ability to sense when significant events were unfolding. How did the meeting go, sir? Whitmore asked carefully. Better than I had hoped, Charles replied. The Prime Minister seems genuinely interested in exploring the possibilities. He paused, looking out at the palace gardens where tourists were already gathering for the changing of the guard ceremony. James, I want you to arrange a private dinner for next week. Family members only, but include everyone who might be affected by these changes. Whitmore made notes on his tablet. Shall I indicate the purpose of the gathering, sir? Tell them I want to discuss the future of the monarchy. That should be enough to ensure attendance without revealing too much detail. Later that afternoon, Charles had a scheduled video conference with the Governor-General of Canada. What had been planned as a routine discussion about upcoming royal visits became an opportunity to gauge international reaction to his reform proposals. Dame Margaret Thompson had served as Governor-General for 3 years and had earned respect for her diplomatic skills and constitutional knowledge. A former Supreme Court justice, she understood the legal complexities involved in any changes to the succession laws. Your Majesty, she said after Charles had outlined his proposals, I think you might be surprised by the level of support these reforms could generate here in Canada. Our own polling suggests that Canadians are quite open to monarchical modernization, particularly if it emphasizes merit and public service. The conversation with Australia's Governor-General later that week produced similar results. Sir David Foster had expressed cautious support for reforms that could help the monarchy remain relevant to younger generations. The alternative, he observed, might be growing Republican sentiment. Meanwhile, palace staff had begun the delicate process of arranging the family dinner that would serve as the next major step in Charles's reform initiative. The guest list included all senior working royals plus several family members who rarely appeared at formal events. Princess Anne confirmed her attendance immediately, as did Prince Edward and Sophie, the Earl and Countess of Wessex. Prince William and Catherine would attend, though they requested additional security given recent protests outside their London residence. Even Prince Andrew, despite his reduced public role, would be present for what promised to be a historic family discussion. The most delicate invitation went to Prince Harry. Despite his physical distance from royal duties and his sometimes difficult relationship with the institution, Charles felt his input could be valuable. Harry's experiences had highlighted some of the problems with the current system that the proposed reforms were designed to address. To Charles's surprise, Harry accepted the invitation and indicated he would travel to London specifically for the dinner. His acceptance came with a request for assurance that the conversation would remain private and would focus on substantive issues rather than personal grievances. As the week progressed, Charles found himself increasingly optimistic about the potential for meaningful change. The positive reactions from political leaders and Commonwealth representatives suggested that the time might be right for bold reforms. More importantly, the family members he had spoken with individually seemed genuinely interested in exploring new approaches to royal service. The most encouraging conversation came with Lady Louise Windsor, who had requested a private meeting to discuss her own future role within the family. At 20, she had completed her university studies and was considering various career options. The proposed reforms could significantly expand her opportunities for royal service. "Uncle Charles," she said during their meeting, "I've always felt like I was on the outside looking in when it came to royal duties. The current system doesn't really have a place for someone like me, even though I would love to contribute to the family's work." Her enthusiasm reminded Charles of his own mother's early dedication to royal service. Louise had demonstrated remarkable composure during public appearances and had shown genuine interest in the charitable causes she supported. Under the proposed merit-based system, her capabilities could be fully utilized. Similar conversations with Beatrice and Eugenie revealed a family eager for opportunities to contribute meaningfully to royal work. Both sisters had developed successful careers outside the traditional royal sphere, but they remained committed to supporting the monarchy when possible. Perhaps most significantly, Zara Tindall had agreed to take on additional royal duties as a test case for the proposed reforms. Her Olympic achievements and natural charisma had made her one of the monarchy's most popular figures, despite her lack of royal title. Her willingness to embrace expanded responsibilities could demonstrate the potential benefits of a merit-based approach. The preliminary discussions with parliamentary leaders had also begun yielding positive results. Opposition leader James Morrison, despite his party's traditionally Republican leanings, had expressed cautious interest in reforms that could make the monarchy more democratically accountable. "If these changes result in better service to the British people," Morrison told Charles during a confidential meeting, "then they deserve serious consideration regardless of party politics." Even more encouraging was the response from the Liberal Democrat leader, Sarah Williams, who had long advocated for institutional modernization. Her party's support could prove crucial in building the broad coalition needed to pass constitutional amendments. The media remained completely unaware of the discussions taking place behind palace walls. Royal correspondents continued filing routine stories about ceremonial events and charity appearances, with no indication that the institution they covered might be on the verge of its most significant transformation in centuries. Charles had instructed his press office to maintain normal operations while the reform discussions continued. Any premature disclosure could derail the entire initiative before it had a chance to be properly evaluated and debated. The king spent his evenings reviewing historical precedents for monarchical reform. The abdication crisis of 1936 had demonstrated how quickly constitutional conventions could change when circumstances demanded it. More recently, successful reforms in other European monarchies provided models for how tradition could be balanced with modernization. As the date for the family dinner approached, Charles felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. The evening would mark the point of no return for his reform initiative. Once the entire family understood what he was proposing, maintaining secrecy would become much more difficult. But he also recognized that family support would be essential for the reform's success. Any significant opposition from senior royals could undermine public confidence in the changes and make parliamentary approval much more difficult. The palace kitchens had been instructed to prepare an intimate dinner that would encourage open conversation. The setting would be the private dining room rather than one of the grand staterooms, emphasizing that this was a family discussion rather than a formal constitutional meeting. Charles had decided to present the proposals himself, without advisors or constitutional experts present. This needed to be a conversation between family members who understood both their individual responsibilities and their collective commitment to serving the nation. The evening that would reshape the British monarchy was now just 3 days away. The private dining room at Buckingham Palace had never hosted a more consequential family gathering. As the evening of November 15 arrived, 17 members of the royal family assembled around the mahogany table that had witnessed countless important conversations throughout British history. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation, though most of those present still had no clear idea why Charles had called this unprecedented meeting. Prince William arrived first, accompanied by Catherine, both of them visibly curious about the evening's purpose. Their recent conversation with Charles had hinted at significant developments, but they had been given no specific details. William's recovery from his riding accident had given him new perspectives on royal duty and succession planning, making him particularly interested in any discussions about the monarchy's future. Princess Anne entered with her characteristic directness, nodding briefly to assembled family members before taking her seat. Her children, Peter Phillips and Zara Tyndall, followed closely behind. Zara's presence was particularly significant, as she rarely attended formal family gatherings despite her growing popularity with the public. Prince Edward and Sophie arrived precisely on time, their years of reliable service having made them valued members of the working royal team. They had privately expressed support for monarchical modernization, though they wondered what specific changes Charles might propose. The most anticipated arrival was Prince Harry, who had flown from California specifically for this dinner. His relationship with the family had improved somewhat over the past year, particularly after his father's accession to the throne. Harry's experiences with royal expectations and his eventual departure from official duties had given him unique insights into the pressures facing family members. Princess Beatrice and Eugenie took seats near their cousins, both of them curious about why they had been included in what was clearly a significant family discussion. Their exclusion from regular working royal duties had sometimes frustrated them, as both had expressed interest in contributing more meaningfully to the family's public service. Lady Louise Windsor, now 20 and completing her university studies, represented the youngest generation present. Her growing confidence in public appearances and genuine interest in royal history made her attendance particularly meaningful. Beside her sat James, Earl of Wessex, who at 16 was beginning to consider his own future relationship with royal responsibilities. Prince Andrew arrived last, his reduced public profile making his inclusion in the gathering somewhat surprising. However, Charles had decided that any major constitutional changes should be discussed with all senior family members, regardless of their current status within the institution. As the palace staff served the first course, conversation remained light and general. Family members caught up on each other's activities, discussed recent charitable events, and shared stories about their children. The underlying tension was palpable, though everyone maintained their characteristic royal composure. Charles waited until the main course was served before indicating that he wished to address the gathering formally. The conversation gradually died down as family members recognized the significance of the moment. "Thank you all for making time for this dinner," Charles began, his voice carrying the weight of the monarchy's authority. "What I'm about to share with you will remain within this room until we decide collectively how to proceed. I'm proposing fundamental changes to how our family serves the nation, changes that could reshape the monarchy for generations to come." The silence that followed was profound. William leaned forward slightly, his expression indicating both interest and concern. Princess Anne showed no visible reaction, though her children exchanged meaningful glances. Harry's face remained carefully neutral, while the younger family members looked puzzled but engaged. Charles proceeded to outline his reform proposal in detail, explaining the research that had led to this moment and the constitutional framework that had been developed over months of careful preparation. He described the merit-based assessment system, the expanded role for family members currently outside the direct line of succession, and the potential for creating new forms of royal service. "The current system wastes enormous talent," he said, looking directly at Zara and then at Beatrice. We have family members who could serve the country brilliantly, but they're constrained by arbitrary rules about birth order and traditional roles. Princess Anne was the first to respond. Charles, I've been saying for years that our system needs updating. Watching Zara handle the flood relief efforts showed me what's possible when we stop limiting ourselves to outdated conventions. William spoke next, his words carefully measured. Father, I understand the logic behind these proposals, but have you considered the risks? Changing succession laws has historically been challenging for the monarchy. Charles nodded. William, that's precisely why we need to have this conversation as a family. Any changes would need support from all of us, not just formal approval from Parliament. Harry surprised many by speaking up strongly in favor of the reforms. These changes could prevent future family members from feeling as trapped as I did. If there had been meaningful alternatives to the traditional path, my story might have been very different. The conversation that followed was unlike any previous royal family gathering. Traditional deference gave way to honest discussion about the pressures of royal life, the limitations of current arrangements, and the potential benefits of reform. Zara Tyndall's perspective proved particularly compelling. I've always felt like I was watching from the sidelines, she said. I have the training, the public support, and the desire to serve, but there's no real place for me in the current system. These reforms could change that. Princess Beatrice voiced similar sentiments. Eugenie and I have tried to contribute through our own charitable work, but we're limited in what we can do officially. The proposed changes would let us serve more meaningfully. Lady Louise Windsor, despite her youth, offered surprisingly mature observations. My generation grew up with different expectations about gender equality and merit-based advancement. The monarchy needs to reflect those values if it wants to remain relevant. The dinner conversation continued for over 3 hours as family members explored the implications of the proposed changes. Some concerns were raised about media reaction and public perception, but the overall response was more positive than Charles had dared to hope. Prince Edward raised practical questions about implementation timelines and the relationship between reformed succession rules and existing constitutional arrangements. Sophie wondered about the impact on Commonwealth realms and the need for international coordination. Perhaps most significantly, the discussion revealed widespread agreement that the monarchy needed to evolve to remain effective. Even those family members who expressed reservations about specific aspects of the proposals supported the general goal of modernization. As the evening concluded, Charles proposed establishing a family working group to develop detailed recommendations for moving forward. The group would include William as heir apparent, and as the family's most experienced member, and representatives from different generations within the family. We have an opportunity to strengthen the monarchy for future generations, Charles said as the gathering broke up. But we need to proceed carefully and with complete family unity. The days following the dinner were filled with intense private conversations as family members digested what they had learned. William and Catherine spent hours discussing the implications for their own children, ultimately concluding that the reforms could provide their children with more choices about their futures while preserving the possibility of meaningful service. Harry's support for the proposals surprised many observers, though his public statements remained carefully neutral. His private conversations with Charles during his London visit focused on ensuring that future family members would have better support systems and more realistic expectations about royal life. The working group held its first meeting 3 days after the dinner. The attendees included Charles, William, Anne, Edward, Beatrice, and Lady Louise, representing different perspectives and generations within the family. Their initial discussion focused on refining the constitutional framework and addressing practical concerns about implementation. Princess Anne proved to be one of the most effective advocates for reform. Her decades of royal service had given her unique insights into the institution's strengths and weaknesses. The monarchy has survived by adapting to changing circumstances, she observed. These reforms represent the kind of adaptation we need for the 21st century. The working group's deliberations were informed by additional research conducted by constitutional experts working directly for the palace. Their analysis confirmed that the proposed changes were legally feasible and consistent with existing democratic principles. Perhaps most importantly, new polling data revealed growing public support for monarchical reform. When asked specifically about merit-based succession within the royal family, 67% of respondents expressed support. Among younger voters, support reached 79%. The positive polling numbers encouraged Charles to accelerate his timeline for moving forward. Political conditions seemed favorable, with the Prime Minister's continued support and growing interest from parliamentary leaders across party lines. International reaction had also been encouraging. The President of Ireland, despite her country's Republican constitution, had expressed admiration for the proposed reforms during a private conversation with the British ambassador. Similar positive responses had come from European Union officials and several Commonwealth leaders. The working group's second meeting focused on communication strategy. How should the reforms be presented to the public? What role should different family members play in explaining the changes? How could they ensure that the proposals were understood as strengthening rather than weakening the monarchy? Lady Louise Windsor's insights proved particularly valuable in this discussion. As someone who had grown up largely outside the public eye but with intimate knowledge of royal life, she understood both the institution's traditions and the expectations of her generation. We need to emphasize that these changes honor the monarchy's core values while making it more effective, she suggested. The goal isn't to abandon tradition but to ensure that tradition serves a meaningful purpose. The working group ultimately recommended a phased approach to implementing the reforms. The first phase would involve expanding opportunities for family members to demonstrate their capabilities through increased royal duties. The formal changes to succession laws would come later, after the public had seen the benefits of a more merit-based approach. Zara Tindall agreed to serve as a test case for the expanded royal role. Her Olympic background and natural charisma made her an ideal candidate to demonstrate the potential of the proposed system. She would take on additional patronages and represent the crown at significant events, providing concrete evidence of how the reforms might work in practice. The decision to begin with informal changes reflected the family's collective wisdom about managing constitutional innovation. By demonstrating the benefits of expanded royal service before implementing formal legal changes, they could build public support and address concerns about the reform's practical implications. Charles felt increasingly confident that his vision for monarchical modernization could become reality. The family unity that had emerged from their discussions provided a strong foundation for moving forward. Political support continued to grow, and public opinion seemed increasingly favorable. The king's decision to sign the succession reform document was no longer a question of whether, but when. The careful preparation and consultation process had created conditions for success that exceeded his most optimistic expectations. As November drew to a close, Charles knew that British history was about to change forever. The monarchy that had endured for over 1,000 years was preparing for its most significant evolution since the English Reformation. The future would bring challenges, but it would also bring unprecedented opportunities for the royal family to demonstrate their continued relevance and value to the nation they served. The morning of December 1 dawned crisp and clear over London as King Charles III prepared to make history. After weeks of careful preparation, family consultations, and political negotiations, the moment had arrived to formally sign the succession reform document that would reshape the British monarchy forever. The past week had been a whirlwind of final preparations. Prime Minister Sarah Mitchell had successfully secured preliminary support from key parliamentary leaders, including a surprising endorsement from the opposition. The Commonwealth realm governments had formally indicated their willingness to consider coordinated constitutional changes. Most importantly, the royal family had achieved unprecedented unity around the reform proposals. In his private study, Charles reviewed the final version of the document one last time. The legal language was precise and comprehensive, establishing the Royal Assessment Council, defining merit-based succession criteria, and creating new pathways for family members to serve the crown. Constitutional scholars had refined every clause to ensure compatibility with existing democratic institutions and Commonwealth arrangements. The morning's schedule included a series of carefully orchestrated meetings that would culminate in the historic signing ceremony. Charles would first meet with senior parliamentary leaders to confirm their support, then consult with Commonwealth representatives via video conference, and, finally, gather with immediate family members for the signing itself. James Whitmore knocked softly before entering the study. "Your Majesty, the parliamentary delegation has arrived. They're waiting in the throne room." The delegation included Prime Minister Mitchell, Opposition Leader James Morrison, Liberal Democrat Leader Sarah Williams, and the Speaker of the House of Commons. Their presence represented the broad political consensus that had emerged around the succession reforms, a unity that few constitutional changes in British history had enjoyed. Charles entered the throne room to find the political leaders engaged in animated discussion about implementation timelines. Their enthusiasm was evident, though they maintained appropriate formality in the king's presence. Your Majesty, Prime Minister Mitchell began, we've reviewed the final documentation with our constitutional advisors. The proposed legislation should move through Parliament smoothly, particularly given the cross-party support we've achieved. Opposition leader Morrison, whose party had historically been skeptical of monarchical privilege, spoke with surprising conviction. Your Majesty, these reforms address many of the concerns we've had about hereditary institutions. By emphasizing merit and public service, you're making the monarchy more compatible with democratic values. The meeting lasted 45 minutes, covering final details about parliamentary procedures and communication strategies. The political leaders agreed to present the reforms as strengthening rather than weakening the monarchy, emphasizing the institution's continued commitment to serving the nation. After the parliamentary delegation departed, Charles joined a video conference with representatives from Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and 12 other Commonwealth realms. The international coordination required for succession law changes had been complex, but the positive response from Commonwealth governments had exceeded all expectations. Dame Margaret Thompson, Canada's Governor-General, spoke for the group. Your Majesty, our governments are prepared to move forward with coordinated legislation that will implement these reforms across the Commonwealth. The timeline we've developed should ensure smooth transitions in all participating realms. The Australian representative added his government's strong support, noting that the reforms could help address growing Republican sentiment by demonstrating the monarchy's willingness to evolve. Similar endorsements came from representatives of other Commonwealth nations, creating a remarkable international consensus. Following the Commonwealth consultation, Charles returned to his study for a private moment of reflection before the signing ceremony. The magnitude of what was about to occur felt overwhelming. He was fundamentally altering an institution that had endured for over a millennium, changing rules that had governed royal succession since medieval times. His thoughts turned to his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, who had modernized the monarchy in countless ways during her remarkable reign. She had embraced television coverage of royal ceremonies, opened palace doors to the public, and gradually made the institution more accessible and transparent. These succession reforms represented the next logical step in that evolutionary process. The family gathering for the signing ceremony was smaller than the dinner 2 weeks earlier but equally significant. Prince William and Catherine were present, along with Princess Anne, Prince Edward and Sophie, and Lady Louise Windsor. The inclusion of Louise was particularly symbolic, as she represented the younger generation who would benefit most from the new system. Zara Tindall attended as well, her presence highlighting the reform's emphasis on expanding opportunities for family members who had demonstrated exceptional capability. Her recent assumption of additional royal duties had generated overwhelmingly positive media coverage and public response. The ceremony itself was designed to be dignified but not overly formal. Charles had chosen his private study rather than a stateroom, emphasizing that this was a family decision about the monarchy's future rather than a grand constitutional spectacle. As family members took their places around the historic desk, Charles felt the weight of history settling on his shoulders. The fountain pen he held had been used by monarchs for generations to sign important documents, from treaties to legislation to royal decrees. Today it would make history once again. Before I sign this document, Charles said, addressing the assembled family members, I want each of you to understand that this moment changes everything. We're not just reforming succession laws, we're redefining what it means to serve the crown in the 21st century. William stepped forward first, his voice steady with conviction. Father, as heir apparent, I fully support these changes. They will strengthen the monarchy by ensuring that future leaders are truly prepared for their responsibilities. Princess Anne spoke next, her words carrying the authority of decades spent serving the crown. Charles, you're giving this family the tools it needs to remain relevant and effective. These reforms honor our traditions while adapting them to modern realities. Lady Louise Windsor, representing the youngest generation, expressed her enthusiasm for the expanded opportunities the reforms would create. These changes mean that people like me can contribute meaningfully to royal service based on our abilities rather than our birth order. Each family member in turn voiced their support for the reforms, creating a moment of unity that strengthened Charles's resolve. The monarchy had always been strongest when the family stood together, and this unprecedented consensus boded well for the reform's success. Charles placed the document on the desk and carefully reviewed the signature page one final time. The text he was about to sign would establish the Royal Assessment Council, create new criteria for succession based on merit and service, and expand opportunities for family members to serve the crown in meaningful ways. The pen touched paper at precisely 11:30 in the morning, and, with careful strokes, Charles signed his name to the most significant monarchical reform in over 4 centuries. The silence in the room was profound as family members witnessed the historic moment. "It is done," Charles said quietly, setting down the pen and looking at the faces around him. "The monarchy enters a new era today, one that honors our past while embracing our future." The immediate aftermath was carefully managed to ensure appropriate media coverage. The palace press office had prepared comprehensive briefing materials explaining the reforms and their benefits for the institution and the nation. Royal correspondents who had covered the monarchy for decades found themselves reporting on changes they had never imagined possible. The initial public reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Polling conducted in the hours following the announcement showed 71% support for the reforms, with particularly strong endorsement from younger demographics. Social media commentary praised the monarchy's willingness to modernize while preserving its essential character. International media coverage was extensive and largely favorable. European newspapers highlighted the reforms as evidence of British institutional innovation, while Commonwealth publications emphasized the collaborative approach that had made the changes possible. The most surprising response came from Republican organizations, several of which issued statements acknowledging that the reforms addressed many of their long-standing concerns about hereditary privilege. While stopping short of full endorsement, their measured reactions suggested that the changes had neutralized some traditional criticisms of the monarchy. Parliamentary debate on the supporting legislation began within days of the signing ceremony. The cross-party consensus that had developed during the consultation process held firm, with even traditionally skeptical MPs expressing support for reforms that emphasized merit and public service. Prime Minister Mitchell's speech introducing the legislation captured the historic significance of the moment. "These reforms demonstrate that British institutions can evolve without abandoning their fundamental purpose," she told the House of Commons. "The monarchy has chosen to strengthen itself by embracing the values that define modern Britain." The Commonwealth coordination proved remarkably smooth, with participating governments moving forward with synchronized legislative processes. The careful preparation and consultation that had preceded the announcement made implementation far easier than anyone had anticipated. Perhaps most significantly, the reforms began generating immediate practical benefits. Several family members who had previously been excluded from meaningful royal service expressed interest in taking on expanded roles. The prospect of merit-based advancement had reinvigorated the institution and created new possibilities for public service. Zara Tyndall's expanded role continued generating positive coverage as she took on additional patronages and represented the crown at significant events. Her natural charisma and genuine connection with the public demonstrated the potential benefits of the new system. Lady Louise Windsor began formally preparing for increased royal responsibilities, working with palace staff to develop her skills in public speaking, diplomacy, and charitable leadership. Her enthusiasm and obvious capability suggested that the next generation of royals would be better prepared than ever before. The Royal Assessment Council was formally established within weeks of the legislation's passage, with its membership reflecting the diverse expertise needed to evaluate royal performance fairly and effectively. The council included retired senior civil servants, Commonwealth representatives, religious leaders, and distinguished citizens from various walks of life. King Charles watched these developments with deep satisfaction, knowing that his decision to push for reform had already begun paying dividends. The monarchy felt more energetic and purpose-driven than it had in years, with family members embracing new opportunities to serve the nation. The long-term implications of the succession reforms would take years to fully unfold, but the immediate impact was clear. The British monarchy had successfully modernized itself while preserving its essential character, creating a model for how ancient institutions could adapt to contemporary realities. As December progressed and the year drew to a close, Charles reflected on the remarkable transformation that had occurred. A conversation at a family dinner 18 months earlier had evolved into constitutional change that would affect the monarchy for generations to come. The document he had signed on that historic December morning represented more than legal reform. It embodied a vision of royal service that emphasized capability, dedication, and genuine commitment to the public good. The monarchy had not just survived into the 21st century, it had positioned itself to thrive. History would judge whether King Charles III's succession reforms strengthened or weakened the British monarchy, but early evidence suggested that his bold decision had given the institution new life and renewed relevance. The ancient crown had successfully adapted once again, ensuring its continued service to the nation it had served for over 1,000 years. The future remained unwritten, but it would be shaped by merit, dedication, and service rather than merely birth and tradition. In reforming the monarchy's succession laws, Charles had created possibilities that previous generations could never have imagined, opening doors for a new era of royal service that would honor the past while embracing the future.